What happens when the underworld's most arrogant prince is forced into a corner, bound by blood to marry the one woman he considers entirely beneath him? Welcome to a tale of power, deception, and a love forged in the fires of betrayal. This is the story of Massimo De Santis, a spoiled mafia heir, and Livia Rossi, his uncle's ugly silent ward. He thought he could break her. He thought she was a pawn. But in a world ruled by monsters, the quietest girl in the room is often the most dangerous. The mahogany-paneled boardroom of the De Santis enterprise smelled of expensive Cuban cigars, aged leather, and the distinct metallic scent of brewing conflict. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rain-slick streets of Rome reflected the city's ancient gold and modern grit. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Massimo De Santis lounged in a high-backed leather chair, his tailored Tom Ford suit emphasizing the dangerous feline grace of a man who had never been told no. At 28, Massimo was the undisputed prince of the Roman underworld. He was devastatingly handsome, lethally arrogant, and entirely spoiled by a life of unchecked privilege. Across from him sat his cousin, Enzo, a man whose eyes were too sharp, his smile too thin, harboring a dangerous ambition that mirrored a viper waiting in the grass. At the head of the table sat Alessandro Moretti, the family's consigliere and chief legal counsel, a man who looked older than his 50 years. Before him rested the final will and testament of Carlo De Santis, Massimo's late uncle, and the legendary Don of the family. "Get on with it, Alessandro," Massimo drawled, examining his heavy gold watch. "I have a flight to Monaco in 3 hours. Isabella is waiting." Alessandro peered over his reading glasses, his expression grave. "You might want to cancel that flight, Massimo. Your uncle's final stipulations are unorthodox." "My uncle is dead," Massimo replied coldly. "I am the head of this family now. Read the paper, so we can formalize what is already mine." Alessandro cleared his throat. "Carlo De Santis leaves the entirety of his legitimate empire, the shipping lines, the real estate holdings, the offshore accounts worth over 2 billion euros to you, Massimo." Massimo smirked at Enzo, a silent victory. However, Alessandro continued, his voice rising over the sudden silence. "This inheritance is conditional." Massimo's smirk vanished. Conditional on what? "Marriage," a soft, almost imperceptible voice answered from the corner of the room. Massimo's head snapped toward the shadows. Sitting in a wingback chair, entirely overlooked until this moment, was Livia Rossi. She was Carlo's ward, the orphan daughter of a loyal foot soldier who had died saving Carlo's life 20 years ago. To Massimo, she was part of the furniture. Livia wore an oversized, drab gray wool sweater that swallowed her petite frame. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe, unflattering bun, and thick, dark-rimmed glasses obscured her face, magnifying her eyes in a way that made her look like a startled owl. She was 22, but carried the weary posture of someone much older. She was the antithesis of everything Massimo valued. She was plain, she was quiet, and she was, in his eyes, incredibly ugly. "What is she doing here?" Massimo snapped. "She is the condition," Alessandro said heavily. "To inherit the empire and assume the title of Don, you must marry Livia Rossi. The marriage must last for a minimum of 3 years, during which time you must cohabitate and present a united front. Should you refuse, or should the marriage fail, the entirety of the estate and the leadership of the family passes to Enzo." The room erupted. Enzo let out a sharp bark of laughter, his eyes gleaming with sudden, predatory joy. Massimo slammed his hands on the table, rising to his feet, his jaw tight with fury. "This is a joke," Massimo snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Livia. "You expect me to marry that? A mouse? A charity case who cowers in the library? I am Massimo De Santis. I do not marry the help." Livia did not flinch. She kept her hands neatly folded in her lap, her gaze steady behind the thick lenses. There was no tears, no trembling, just an unnerving, infinite patience. "You have 24 hours to decide, Massimo," Alessandro said quietly. "Marriage to Livia, or you surrender the throne to Enzo." Massimo glared at Enzo, who was already looking at the room as if he owned it. The thought of bowing to his treacherous cousin made Massimo's blood boil. He turned his venomous gaze back to Livia. She looked back at him, her expression completely unreadable. "Fine," Massimo spat, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I will marry the mouse. But don't expect me to play the loving husband, Livia. You will be nothing more than a ghost in my house." Livia finally spoke, her voice smooth and devoid of intimidation. "I would expect nothing less, Massimo. Just ensure you sign on the dotted line." The wedding was a farce, a bleak, transactional affair held in the private chapel of the DeSantis estate in the rolling hills of Tuscany. Outside, a torrential downpour battered the stained-glass windows, a fitting, pathetic fallacy for the union taking place within. There were no flowers, no joyous music, no gathered throngs of well-wishers, only the immediate heads of the family syndicates, watching with calculating eyes. Massimo stood at the altar in a sharp black tuxedo, radiating a fury so palpable it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. He looked like an executioner rather than a groom. When the doors opened, Livia walked down the aisle alone. She wore a simple, unadorned white dress that looked 2 sizes too big, deliberately hiding her silhouette. Her hair was tightly pinned back, her thick glasses firmly in place. She looked fragile, almost entirely swallowed by the vastness of the cathedral, but her steps were measured and even. She did not look at the whispering guests. She kept her eyes fixed on the priest. As she reached the altar, Massimo refused to offer his hand. Livia calmly stepped up beside him. "You look ridiculous," he whispered viciously, leaning down so only she could hear, like a child wearing her mother's curtains. "My uncle must have been senile to think this would save you." "Your uncle knew exactly what he was doing," Livia replied softly, not looking at him. "And you look like a man who is afraid he's already lost." Massimo's jaw clenched. He grabbed her hand to slide the heavy, heirloom diamond ring onto her finger. He squeezed her knuckles hard enough to bruise, a silent threat, but Livia's expression remained entirely blank. When the priest commanded them to kiss, Massimo leaned in and pressed a brief, bruising, loveless kiss to the corner of her mouth. She tasted like peppermint and something else, something resilient. It infuriated him. The reception was held at Massimo's private penthouse in the heart of Rome. It was an exercise in humiliation for Livia. Massimo's glamorous mistress, Isabella, had been invited. Isabella was everything Livia was not. Tall, blonde, draped in crimson silk, and dripping with aggressive sexuality. As Livia sat alone at the head table, sipping water, Isabella glided over, flanked by Massimo. "So, this is the little charity case that bought Massimo his crown," Isabella purred, her eyes scanning Livia with blatant disgust. "Don't worry, little mouse. Massimo and I have an understanding. You can have the title, the piece of paper, and the empty bedrooms. I will keep his actual attention." Massimo smirked, wrapping an arm around Isabella's waist, waiting for Livia to break, to cry, to show some sign of weakness. He wanted her to understand her place at the very bottom. Livia set her water glass down. She looked up at Isabella, her dark eyes magnifying behind her lenses. "I am perfectly content with that arrangement, Isabella. I have no interest in babysitting an overgrown child. You may keep him entertained. Just ensure he doesn't embarrass the family name in public. I tolerate many things, but bad PR is not one of them." Isabella's smile shattered. Massimo's arm dropped from Isabella's waist, shock rippling through him. For the first time, he truly looked at the girl he had married. There was a razor-sharp intellect hiding behind those atrocious glasses. "Watch your mouth, Livia," Massimo warned, his voice dangerously low. "Watch your empire, Massimo," Livia replied smoothly, standing up. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it has been a long day of pretending to care. I will be in my wing of the penthouse. Do not disturb me." She walked away, leaving the spoiled mafia boss and his mistress staring after her. The balance of power, infinitesimally, yet undeniably, shifted. The first 3 months of their marriage set a bitter, frigid routine. Massimo lived his life exactly as he had before. Late nights at underground casinos, ruthless business dealings at the docks, and public appearances with Isabella draped on his arm. He paraded his infidelity for the world, and the syndicate bosses to see, daring Livia to challenge him. Livia did not. She became a ghost in the sprawling, 5,000-square-foot penthouse. She claimed the library, a massive, 2-story room filled with Carlo's old books and financial ledgers, as her sanctuary. She fired the decorator Massimo sent to fix her rooms, and instead spent her days immersed in complex legal texts, international tax law, and the encrypted files her adoptive father had left her. Massimo found her indifference infuriating. He was a man used to women, begging for his attention, his approval, his wealth. Livia asked for nothing. She never complained when he came home smelling of expensive perfume and cheap liquor. She never asked for money. She simply existed, a silent, mocking reminder of the chains his uncle had placed upon him. One rainy Tuesday evening, Massimo returned home earlier than usual. The penthouse was silent. Isabella was away in Milan, and for the first time in weeks, Massimo found himself restless. He poured a glass of scotch and wandered the echoing halls, eventually seeing a sliver of light beneath the heavy oak doors of the library. He pushed the doors open. The room was warm, smelling of old paper and rain against the glass. Livia was seated at the massive mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of financial reports, ledgers, and a glowing laptop. For a moment, Massimo just watched her. She was wearing her usual shapeless sweater, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. But without the harsh lighting of the boardroom or the chapel, the soft lamplight caught the rich mahogany tones in her hair and the delicate, almost aristocratic slope of her jaw. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice shattering the quiet. Livia didn't jump. She finished typing a line of code before looking up. "I am reviewing the quarterly margins for the Naples shipping route. We are losing 11% of our gross profit to localized graft and inefficient fuel routing." Massimo frowned, stepping into the room. "That's syndicate business. You don't have the clearance, nor the intellect, to understand those ledgers." "Who gave them to you?" "Uncle Carlo," Livia said simply. "Before he died, he taught me how to read the family's true books, Massimo. Not the sanitized versions Enzo gives you." Massimo set his glass down, a surge of territorial anger flushing through him. "Enzo is my second in command. He manages the docks. Are you accusing him of stealing from me?" "I am not accusing him. I am proving it," Livia said. She spun the laptop around. "Look at the discrepancy between the manifest weights and the fuel expenditures. Enzo is skimming off the top. He's funding a private militia, Massimo. He is preparing to move against you." Massimo stared at the screen. The numbers were undeniable, elegantly cross-referenced in a way his own accountants had never managed. He looked from the screen to the mousy girl sitting before him. "Why are you telling me this?" Massimo asked, his voice losing its usual mocking edge. "You hate me. If Enzo kills me, you're free of this marriage. You get your payout, and you can leave." Livia took her glasses off, pinching the bridge of her nose. Without the thick frames, her eyes were a piercing, vivid amber, intelligent and deeply tired. "I don't hate you, Massimo. I pity you. You are a king who doesn't know his castle is built on quicksand. And I am telling you this because I gave my word to Uncle Carlo that I would protect this family. That includes you, whether you deserve it or not." She put her glasses back on, the shield returning. "Now, please leave. I have work to do." For the first time in his life, Massimo DeSantis was left speechless. He walked out of the library, the image of those amber eyes burning in his mind, realizing that the mouse he married might just be the most dangerous predator in the house. The annual Capo di Tutti Capi Gala in Milan was the most critical event of the year for the Italian underworld. It was where alliances were forged, rivalries were tested, and weakness was punished with death. Massimo had always attended with Isabella, a glittering trophy on his arm. But this year, the old bosses had demanded to see the new DeSantis bride. They wanted to see if Massimo was truly in control of his uncle's legacy. "You have to attend," Massimo told Livia grimly the morning of the gala. "And you cannot look like a vagrant. Enzo has been whispering to the northern families that I am a laughingstock, controlled by a pitiful, ugly bride. Tonight, we prove him wrong." Livia didn't look up from her book. "I will be ready at 8. Massimo hired a team of stylists, but when they arrived at her door, Livia dismissed them immediately. She locked herself in her suite for the rest of the day. Massimo paced the living room, a knot of genuine anxiety in his chest. If she embarrassed him tonight, Enzo would use the blood in the water to launch a coup. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the grand staircase opened. Massimo, mid-sip of his scotch, froze. The woman descending the stairs was a stranger. Gone were the shapeless sweaters and the suffocating bun. Livia wore a custom-made midnight blue velvet gown that clung to curves Massimo never knew she possessed. The fabric pooled around her like liquid night, sophisticated yet lethal. Her dark hair was styled in soft, vintage Hollywood waves, framing a face that took his breath away. The thick glasses were gone, replaced by contacts, revealing the striking, aristocratic symmetry of her features, the sharp cheekbones, and those devastating amber eyes, lined perfectly to accentuate their predatory slant. She wasn't just beautiful, she was regal. She looked like a mafia queen. "Close your mouth, Massimo," Livia said smoothly as she reached the bottom step. "You're drooling." Massimo swallowed hard, his heart hammering an unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. Where have you been hiding this?" "I don't hide," Livia replied, accepting the velvet cloak he numbly offered her. "I simply camouflage. It is safer to be invisible when you live among wolves. But tonight, you need a wolf of your own. Shall we?" The gala was held in a 16th century palazzo. When Massimo and Livia entered, the grand ballroom fell deathly silent. The whispers that had been mocking Massimo instantly died. Isabella, who had attended on the arm of a minor politician to spite Massimo, dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor. Enzo, however, was not easily deterred. Midway through the evening, as Massimo was cornered by the Sicilian bosses, Enzo approached Livia. He was flanked by 2 massive enforcers, a predatory sneer on his face. "A beautiful mask, Livia," Enzo purred loudly, drawing the attention of the surrounding crowd. But a mask doesn't change what's underneath. A charity case. A stray dog Carlo picked up from the gutter. "Tell me, how much of my family's money did you have to spend to look like you belong here?" The music seemed to dip. Massimo saw the confrontation from across the room and started pushing through the crowd, his blood running cold. But Livia didn't need rescuing. She turned to Enzo, her posture perfectly straight, her amber eyes locking onto his with terrifying calm. "It cost exactly the amount you skimmed from the Naples route last quarter, Enzo. 4.2 million euros. A mere fraction of what you've stolen from your own blood." Gasps echoed through the room. Accusing a made man of stealing from the family in front of the commission was a death sentence if unproven. Enzo's face flushed a violent purple. "You lying little bitch. I have the offshore ledger numbers, the shell company names in the Caymans, and the wire transfer receipts signed by your proxy," Livia cut in, her voice ringing clear like a silver bell. "I submitted the dossier to the commission heads an hour before we arrived." Enzo froze, his eyes darting to the Sicilian bosses, who were now looking at him not with respect, but with the cold, dead eyes of executioners. Massimo reached Livia's side, his hand instinctively going to the small of her back. He felt the tension in her spine, but to the world, she was carved from ice. "If you ever speak to my wife like that again," Massimo said, his voice a low, lethal rumble that echoed through the silent room, "I won't wait for the commission's verdict. I will carve your heart out myself." Enzo backed away, looking like a dead man walking. Massimo turned to Livia, the adrenaline and awe warring in his veins. She had just dismantled his greatest rival with a few sentences, without a single weapon, clad in velvet and diamonds. As they walked away, Massimo leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You didn't just camouflage, Livia. You were laying a trap." Livia offered a tiny, dangerous smile. "I told you, Massimo, I am protecting this family." The victory at the gala was a catalyst. Enzo, realizing his legal and financial avenues were destroyed, resorted to the desperate tactics of a cornered animal. Violence. It happened 3 nights later. Massimo and Livia were returning from a tense dinner with the Northern Syndicate bosses. The rain was torrential, washing the ancient cobblestones of Rome in a slick black sheen. As their armored sedan navigated a narrow, winding alley near the Colosseum, a garbage truck suddenly pulled out, blocking the exit. "Ambush!" the driver yelled, throwing the car into reverse. But another heavy SUV smashed into their rear bumper, trapping them. Gunfire erupted. The deafening roar of automatic weapons shattered the night. The sedan's bulletproof glass spiderwebbed instantly under the barrage of high-caliber rounds. Massimo's bodyguard in the front seat was hit through the windshield, slumping over the dashboard. Massimo drew his Sig Sauer, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He turned to Livia, expecting screams, panic, tears. Instead, she was already on the floor of the back seat, her hands covering her head, her breathing slow and controlled. "Stay down," Massimo roared, kicking open his door and firing blindly into the dark to lay down cover fire. He managed to drop 2 of the masked gunmen, but there were too many. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his suit jacket and biting into his flesh. He grunted, stumbling back into the car. "We can't stay here. The glass is failing," Massimo shouted over the din. "The sewer grate," Livia yelled, pointing to a heavy iron grate just 3 feet from her door. Uncle Carlo mapped the underground tunnels for emergency extractions. "We go down." Massimo stared at her, stunned, but a fresh volley of bullets shattering the passenger window made the decision for him. "Go, now." Livia threw open her door and scrambled out, ignoring the glass cutting into her hands and knees. Massimo followed, providing cover fire. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed the heavy iron grate and heaved it aside. Livia dropped into the dark, foul-smelling abyss below, and Massimo followed just as the sedan's gas tank was pierced, erupting into a massive fireball above them. They landed hard in the damp, echoing darkness of the ancient Roman catacombs. Massimo groaned, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Livia didn't hesitate. She ripped the hem of her expensive silk dress, grabbed Massimo's arm, and expertly bound the wound tight enough to stop the bleeding. "We have to keep moving," she said, her voice echoing in the gloom. "They'll come down after us." For 2 hours, they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels in absolute darkness, guided only by the dim flashlight on Massimo's phone and Livia's astonishing memory of Carlo's maps. Massimo was losing blood, his vision swimming, his legendary arrogance stripped away by the raw, brutal reality of survival. Eventually, they reached a rusted iron door. Livia punched in a code on an ancient keypad, and the door groaned open, revealing a hidden, dust-covered safe house beneath a deconsecrated church. It was stocked with medical supplies, weapons, and a generator. Once the heavy door was locked from the inside, Massimo collapsed onto a dusty cot. Livia immediately went to work. She found the medical kit, cleaned his wound with iodine, ignoring his curses, and stitched the graze with a steady, unflinching hand. Massimo watched her as she worked. Her hands, usually so delicate, were covered in dirt and his blood. Her hair was a mess, but to Massimo, in the dim, flickering light of the safe house, she had never looked more beautiful. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice raspy. "When my father was killed," Livia said softly, not looking up. "I was 5. I watched him bleed out on our kitchen floor because no one knew how to stop it. I swore I would never be helpless again." Massimo felt a profound, heavy ache in his chest that had nothing to do with the gunshot wound. For years he had judged her, mocked her, treated her like a burden. He had been a spoiled prince playing at war, while she was a soldier who had lived in the trenches her entire life. "Livia," Massimo whispered, reaching out with his good arm. He gently caught her chin, forcing her to look at him. Those amber eyes were wide, unguarded, reflecting the trauma of the night. "I was wrong. About everything. About you." Livia stared at him, the walls she had built for years finally cracking. "Massimo, don't." "I am a fool," he continued, his thumb brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek. "I thought you were a mouse, but you are the lioness of this family. You saved my life tonight." For the first time since their wedding, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't for show. It was desperate, grateful, and deeply vulnerable. Livia gasped, stiffening for a fraction of a second before she surrendered, her hands gripping his blood-stained shirt, kissing him back with a fierce, suppressed passion that had been hiding beneath the surface for years. They spent 2 days in the underground safe house, healing and planning. The intimacy of their survival stripped away the remaining pretense between them. Massimo learned of the immense burden Livia had carried, acting as Carlo's secret ledger keeper, absorbing the abuse of the family to keep her cover intact. Livia saw the man beneath the spoiled mafia boss, a man desperate for a purpose beyond violence, a man capable of fierce, terrifying loyalty. When they finally emerged, slipping into a loyalist stronghold outside Rome, they discovered the extent of Enzo's betrayal. Enzo had declared Massimo dead, seizing control of the family estates and calling an emergency meeting of the syndicates to consolidate his power. But worse than Enzo's ambition was the betrayal that hit closer to home. Isabella, Alessandro Moretti, the loyal lawyer, told them grimly over a secure line. "She is with Enzo. She gave him your itinerary for the night of the ambush. In exchange, Enzo promised her the position of Don's wife." Massimo's face turned to stone. The anger was there, but the old, fragile ego was gone. He looked at Livia, who was silently reviewing the digital files on a secure tablet. "She sold me out for a title," Massimo said quietly. "People who crave the spotlight will always follow the brightest flame." "Massimo," Livia replied without looking up. "Let her have him. They are a perfect match. Both build their empires on lies." Livia tapped the screen, a predatory smile touching her lips. "And I am about to burn it all down." "What have you found?" Massimo asked, walking over to stand behind her, his hand naturally resting on her shoulder. "Uncle Carlo gave you the title of Don, Massimo, and he gave you the legitimate businesses. But he knew Enzo would eventually make a play." Livia looked up, her amber eyes blazing with strategic genius. "Carlo never gave you the master cipher to the offshore accounts, the 2 billion euros. Massimo frowned. "If I don't have it, and Enzo doesn't have it, who does?" Livia reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy, ornate silver locket she had worn every day since her childhood. She snapped it open. Inside was not a picture, but a micro USB drive. "I do," she said softly. "I am the bank, Massimo. Without my biometric authorization and this drive, the entire DeSantis fortune is locked in the ether. Enzo thinks he has seized a golden goose, but he has seized a rotting carcass. He doesn't have the funds to pay the militias, the politicians, or the commission." Massimo stared at the drive, then at the brilliant, dangerous woman holding it. He realized then that Uncle Carlo had never forced him to marry Livia to protect her from the family. He had forced Massimo to marry Livia to protect the family from Massimo's own stupidity, giving him a queen who could outmaneuver them all. "He's holding his coronation meeting tomorrow, at the main warehouse at the docks," Massimo said, a dark, lethal grin spreading across his face. "Let's go claim our throne." The massive warehouse at the port of Ostia was filled with the heavy hitters of the Italian underworld. Enzo stood at the head of a long metal table, Isabella by his side, draped in diamonds that used to belong to Massimo's mother. Enzo was mid-speech, promising a new era of expansion and ruthlessness, when the heavy steel doors of the warehouse shrieked open. The room went dead silent as a dozen heavily armed men, loyal to Massimo, flooded the catwalks, their rifles trained on the floor. Through the main doors walked Massimo DeSantis. He moved with a new, terrifying gravity. He wasn't the spoiled boy they remembered. He was a scarred, battle-hardened king. And beside him, her arm looped casually through his, was Livia. She wore a sharp, immaculately tailored black pantsuit, her hair slicked back, her eyes hidden behind dark designer sunglasses. She looked like the wrath of God. Enzo's face drained of color. "Massimo, you're dead." "I am difficult to kill, cousin," Massimo said, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel roof. "A trait I inherited from our uncle." Isabella took a step back from Enzo, panic flashing in her eyes. "Massimo, darling, he forced me. I had no choice." Livia raised a single manicured hand, cutting Isabella off. "Silence, Isabella, the adults are speaking." Livia stepped forward, pulling the silver flash drive from her pocket. She plugged it into a tablet, handed to her by Alessandro. Enzo DeSantis. Livia's voice was clear, authoritative, and merciless. You stand accused of high treason, attempted murder of the Don, and the theft of family assets. You promised these men millions to back your coup. But you are broke. Livia tapped the screen. Behind Enzo, massive monitors that tracked the shipping manifests suddenly switched over to the master banking ledgers of the DeSantis empire. I control the master cipher, Livia announced to the stunned crowd. And as of 2 minutes ago, I have frozen every single account associated with Enzo's offshore proxies. The payroll for your mercenaries? Gone. The bribes for the Port Authority? Erased. You don't have a single euro to your name, Enzo. The syndicate bosses, realizing Enzo could no longer pay them, instantly shifted their allegiances. The men, standing behind Enzo, lowered their weapons, stepping away from him as if he were diseased. Enzo drew his pistol, screaming in rage, aiming directly at Livia. Before he could pull the trigger, Massimo drew his weapon with blinding speed. 2 shots rang out. Enzo dropped to the concrete, the gun clattering from his lifeless hand. Isabella screamed, dropping to her knees. Massimo didn't even look at her. He holstered his weapon and turned to the syndicate bosses. The old ways of this family die today, Massimo declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The petty theft, the senseless violence, the betrayals. From this day forward, the DeSantis family moves into the light. We build legitimate empires. Anyone who stands against this vision will join my cousin on the floor. The bosses, terrified and awed by the display of absolute power and financial control, bowed their heads in submission. Massimo turned to Livia. The cold, ruthless dawn melted away, leaving only a man looking at the woman who had saved his soul. He took off her sunglasses, looking deep into those brilliant amber eyes. You kept your promise to my uncle, Massimo whispered. You protected the family. I protected my husband, Livia corrected softly, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. The family is just a bonus. Massimo smiled, pulling her into a slow, commanding kiss in front of the entire Roman underworld. He had married an ugly duckling out of spite, only to realize he had been blessed with a magnificent, lethal swan. Livia Rossi had walked into the lion's den as a silent mouse, but she walked out as the undisputed queen of the DeSantis empire, and Massimo, the spoiled boy, had finally become a man worthy of standing beside her. Thank you so much for reading this intense journey of betrayal, growth, and unexpected love. If you enjoyed Massimo and Livia's story of resilience, dignity, and fighting for the truth against all odds, please make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a good mafia romance with a strong, brilliant female lead. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our cinematic story creations.